This week on Quality Digest Live, we examine the 4 ways people solve problems and why the best way is often missed.
Plus, the 5 agreements that lead to great customer service. That and more when we come back.
Today's sponsor of Quality Digest Live is Hexagon Metrology. Hexagon carries the widest range of quality brands. With an extensive support network, Hexagon is also your partner. Hexagon Metrology. We are metrology.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for May 9th, 2014. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. Well, as you know, if you follow our show, I like to keep on top of what is going on in the world of 3D printing. And this is actually for a couple of reasons. First, I believe that there really is a close tie-in between what's going on with 3D printing and what's going on in 3D-dimensional metrology as well. And also, 3D printing is or will have an impact on customer expectations as well as the supply chain. So I think it's really relevant for our audience. So this week, we came across an interesting article on 3D printing with metal. Now, if you aren't familiar with how this process works, it's basically a layer of powdered metal is laid down and then fused with a laser. And what happens, the laser just follows the contours of the solid area of that part at that particular slice, basically melting the area hit with the laser into a solid metal. And then another layer of powder is laid down, and that's fused and so on until you build up your 3D model. Well, in the article, Metal 3D Printing, Changing the Future of Additive Manufacturing, the author discusses how one company, Concept Laser, is doing some measurement and corrections on the fly in order to improve the laser metal 3D printing process. And first of all, if we can pull up a slide, I'll kind of explain what's going on here. So at the same time they have a laser that is melting the metal, they have a scanner, or a camera if you will, to monitor about a 1 square millimeter where the laser contacts the powder. And so you'd see that there at the bottom of your screen with the little orange dot. And they can, using this camera, they can monitor 2 things. First of all, they can monitor what's called the melt pool. And this is the area where the laser is actually melting the powder. And they can tell whether there is enough laser power, or maybe too little, to develop a pool of melted metal in the right size. They can also monitor the dose, and that's the amount of powder being laid down. Is there too much powder? Is there too little powder? Armed with this data, they can adjust laser power and dose in real time on the fly. So what we're seeing here now is really kind of a convergence of 3D printing and image capture to help improve the quality and accuracy of 3D printed objects in real time, something that we've actually talked about on this show in the past. This process is really just getting more and more refined and faster. I might add as well, and actually larger volumes. This particular company is able to print out, I think I saw a picture of a gearbox that was probably a 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot by maybe 18 inches. Yeah, another 1.5 foot tall. So that's actually a fairly large build volume and pretty darn precise too. So interesting stuff. The process just keeps getting more and more refined as we go.
Yeah, it's cool. You know, I think that maybe the idea a few years ago, 5 or more years ago, when this really was more theoretical than actual, was that this would eventually be more of a consumer-oriented thing. 3D printing would be really more something that people would do themselves at home, maybe, and create
or R&D.
Or R&D.
Yeah.
But I think what we're seeing now is we're really seeing it embedded more tightly into the manufacturing process. And I think that, you know, we're seeing that people aren't really even using the term 3D printing as much anymore. It's really additive manufacturing.
Additive manufacturing
is the term of choice for most people. I mean, they're kind of interchangeable, but I think the perspective of additive manufacturing, adding to the manufacturing process, making things a lot more efficient and inexpensive, because, you know, when you can...
And custom.
Custom, I mean, when you can print this stuff, I mean, I just read an article, not in Quality Digest, but somewhere else, where they were talking about the fact that it's so expensive to drill holes in parts, but when you can just lay them in, you can basically create those holes already in place. It's so much cheaper and quicker.
Right.
For certain things like turbines.
Less material, less waste.
Less material.
Yep.
Things like turbines and
the big thing now really is speed. 3D printing is still relatively slow, but the process itself itself gets faster, and there's other ways to get around the speed issue as well. Actually, you just use more machines.
Yep. Yeah.
So
interesting stuff.
Yep.
So thanks, sir. We're going to continue to. I know you're going to continue to keep your eye on
Yep.
additive manufacturing, 3D printing as we go. Alrighty. Well, also in the news this week, the University of Arizona is combining high-tech sensor technology, data gathering, and risk assessment in an important new device that could yield benefits for pretty much everyone and anywhere. Sensors may help hospital patients keep from falling, is the name of this news item, which ran in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, and you can see it right there. Now, as mentioned, this piece comes to us from the University of Arizona. The UA Medical Center right there on campus is the site of an ongoing study that seeks to predict and prevent a serious problem within healthcare, the tendency of patients to fall. And when I say serious problem, I mean a really
it's a big
serious
deal. Yeah.
problem. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
And I was surprised actually to read the data. 500,000 hospitalized patients fall each year in the United States alone, resulting in 150,000 injuries. 150,000 injuries in the United States each year from people falling in hospitals. It's kind of mind-boggling to me.
That's why they freak out, by the way, when you get out of bed when you're not supposed to.
Yeah, because you could fall.
You could fall, yeah.
So this is a big issue. So in response to that big issue, AU researchers have worked with a company by the name of Zephyr Technology, and they're based in Annapolis, Maryland, to create a sensor that tracks patients' skin temperature, physical activity, heart rate, and other measures that are known indicators of the patient's tendency to fall. All that data is then gathered by the sensor and plotted against an algorithm that estimates the risk of a fall based on all that gathered information. Makes sense. It's important to note that at this point, the study is simply gathering and plotting the data, but it's not hard to see how this device could be used in the future by nurses or relatives of patients, in-home caretakers, or anyone who's monitoring or taking care of patients. If just a fraction of those 500,000 annual falls can be prevented, it'll be obviously a wonderful benefit for all concerned, naturally in terms of reducing pain and suffering for the patients, but also as it relates to lower medical costs overall in the system. I mean, you think about it, less accidents equal fewer claims, and equal, in theory, would equal, I think, lower insurance premiums for everyone. This is a great example for me of how we're looking now at data gathering, data correlation analysis, big data, risk assessment. All this stuff is kind of buzz terms or buzzy phrases that we throw around a lot, but it has a lot of practical meaning too, especially if you have a loved one, family member in the hospital, elderly or not. I mean,
so the idea behind this is to predict that they might fall soon. Is that
there are, according to these measures, like I say, heart rate, activity levels, body temperature, will predict the likelihood of somebody falling within a certain time period. So I mean, I think the intent here is that the sensor will gather that data. It will be logged and it will be analyzed, and somebody who has access to the data, whether it be a nurse maybe or
caregiver of some sort, maybe gives a heads up or something,
would say, hey, the patient is having an issue that may cause a fall. Maybe we need to get them to a hospital. Maybe we just need to watch them more closely.
Make sure they're sitting down or laying down.
Whatever it may be. The problem is, I mean, the range of when that fall may happen is kind of amorphous. I think the technology will improve and hopefully will help that. But again, what we're talking about here is using sensor technology and using big data and data analysis to begin to correlate and find reasons why something may happen. We talk about it all the time within the factories or manufacturing environments, but in healthcare, it's hugely valuable. Yeah. So really good story. And for more information on it, as well as, of course, all the pieces that Dirk and I are going to be covering on today's show, you can check out the story links available right below our video player screen, although, as always, right down there.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Well, whether we like it or not, when it comes to solving problems, we often really end up just addressing the symptoms rather than the problem. And very often also we look for the fixes to be local. And it kind of makes sense, right? Symptoms are easier to spot. They're often easier to treat. And those fixes are often just in our office or our jurisdiction, our particular silo, and it's because it's easy. I mean, you see something happen, you want to fix it. And obviously, sometimes the easiest fix is just to put a Band-Aid on it, call it good, wait for it to go away. Sure. It kind of depends on the problem. And also, very often, we just don't look outside our department. It's happening to us, so we think we have to fix it, take care of it, move on, and we don't think necessarily of what the implications of what our fix is doing to to maybe the entire organization. And that's kind of what is the topic of this week's column, The 4 Ways to Solve Problems by Trip Babbitt. And in this article Babbitt delves a bit into Russell Ackoff's book, Idealized Design, that addresses 4 ways to treat problems. And Ackoff mentions 4 ways: absolution, resolution, solution, and dissolution. And we'll go into those a little bit here. So the first thing is absolution. Just ignore the problem and maybe it will go away. Now that sounds a little facetious, but really all of us resort to this tactic at some point because, let's face it, a lot of the stuff that we do, problems that we do face in our day-to-day job, do just go away. They're kind of anomalies. They're things, they crop up. We know they're black swan kind of events, you know, and you can spend a lot of time dealing with them, or you can go, just fix it. It's not going to happen again for a few more years. So you just kind of ignore it, right? You mitigate the problem. You take care of the customer or whatever, but you don't worry about necessarily fixing the problem because it's so random that you don't worry about it. It's part of the kind of the common cause variation, which Tripp mentions in there. The next problem-solving method is resolution, which is really kind of 2 parts. One is determining if a similar problem has arisen before and seeing if the past approach can be used to fix the present problem. And the second method is to look for all changes made prior to the problem revealing itself and then taking the problem back to the original, or taking the situation back to the original state or condition. So a lot of us take this approach, again, because it's kind of easy. We've had this problem before. How did we solve it before? Great, do that. Or, look, this came about as a result of the last change order, let's say, last engineering change order, so just change it back to the way it was and the problem will go away. Right. Again, it's a quick fix, and it works, so why not do it? Now, the third problem-solving method that we use is simply find a solution. Babbitt and I guess Ackoff say this is the most widely used method. I'm not sure I agree with that, but logically it kind of makes sense. If you have a problem, you solve it. You analyze the problem and find a solution. You get your Pareto and your fishbone charts out. You do your 5 whys and your root cause analysis, and you just kind of dig into that puppy. Now, if you look at number 2 and 3, resolution or solution, if you look at where those are occurring, most likely you're doing that resolution or that solution in your own little silo. Most likely you aren't looking at solving your problem from a holistic point of view. And there's some real issues in this, and we'll get to this in our 4th solution here in just a little bit. But we've talked about this before, is very often when you're working within a silo, there's a number of problems. You're not sharing information. So that's one problem. So you may be fixing the problem for yourself, but you aren't necessarily helping anybody else with it. And also, your solution may not tie in to what the process is as a whole throughout the entire company. So again, you're fixing it, but only for yourself, and you're not considering the ramifications. And in fact, you're actually not even doing a full fix. You may think you're providing a solution, and Babbitt actually gives a really good example here. You're not really finding a solution. You're just finding a way to kind of pass the problem off to some other part of the organization. It's out of your silo, so the problem is fixed, right? So this all leads us to the 4th problem-solving method, dissolution. Whereas I like to say, if that solution doesn't work and the other solutions don't work, dissolution works.
Dis or that.
Here you go. I had to throw that in somewhere. Okay. So dissolution is basically just preventing a problem from occurring. What Babbitt is referring to here, and if you've read Trip Babbitt, you understand where he's coming from. It all harkens back to a systems approach, and that's where Babbitt is coming from. That's his background. So what he's saying is it's all well and good to solve a problem, and certainly when a problem occurs, we're talking, let's say, a specific problem, a customer complaint, you obviously have to do something about it right at that point. You've got to mitigate it. You've got to address it. You can't just say, okay, well, we've got a problem, and now we need to, put a preventative method in place to prevent it from happening again and ignore the customer. You got to deal with it. But moving ahead, you do want to look at your entire system and understand why problems are occurring to begin with, and then redesign the system to address those shortcomings. The problem says, says Babbitt, is that when you look at simply finding a solution, you typically do so at a granular level, your department, your office, your function, that sort of thing. But any actions you take there may have negative repercussions in other parts of the company if the entire system isn't taken into consideration. In order to work together, writes Babbitt, organizations must learn to synthesize, to see the organization in its entirety and not just as individual roles or functions. This is different, he says, from analysis or the act of breaking problems into pieces. So again, it's very easy to kind of fall into this role of here's a problem, we're going to solve it, we're going to move on, without actually taking the entire organization, looking at the system as a whole. Because very often, the real solution to your problem, and forget about prevention. Prevention is important, but very often the real solution to the problem is something that may be happening way upstream from what you're doing, and all you're doing is kind of shifting it around and making sure it doesn't affect you. But if the system as a whole has an issue with it, then you're not really dealing with the problem unless you repair it somewhere upstream or look at the system.
Yeah, and I think a corollary to that is the idea of documentation and communication. That you know, if you're in a position where you're not dealing with it systemically, if you're not dealing with these problems systemically, and you are kind of just looking at things happening within your silo, maybe a first step to that is you need to communicate better with the other team members across the organization, across the enterprise, because not only can they benefit from what you're learning as you're unspooling a problem, but maybe they solved the same problem already 3 years ago, and you maybe never knew about it because nobody documented it properly. Maybe there's some tribal knowledge that you can tap into. I mean, all these things are symptoms of the same disease that Tripp was talking about, this disconnect that organizations don't look at themselves as a unified whole.
Well, and I think that another issue Tripp has brought up in other articles is that part of that communication is understanding, is everybody in the entire company understanding what is actually going on.
Yeah.
You know, what is the process, and does the process that we have in place align with what our goals are supposed to be? You know, what we're trying to accomplish. Because very often, you know, you have duplicative efforts, or you have one part of the system actually working against what another part of the system is trying to do. If you don't understand what everybody and every function in the company is doing and how it ties together in the overall system, you don't really understand if you're delivering your product or service to your customer in the way that it needs to be delivered.
You know, actually a good, very simple tool to do that, to begin to understand that, is flow charting. You know, you look at current state and future state maps, and that's a way to begin to penetrate into that. Because when you do that, when you chart out a process, again, from start to finish, all the way upstream, all the way to downstream, you really begin to then have that picture of everything. And you understand why, when you hand something off to the next team, what they're going to do with it, or you understand what happened before it got to you. And you know, organizations today are very complex. So if you don't take the time to do that, it's going to be hard for you to understand how that all fits together.
Yep.
So
good article by Tripp.
Good stuff by Tripp. Tripp's always an interesting writer. We
fun.
always appreciate that stuff from Tripp Babbitt. Okay. Thank you then, Tripp, and thank you, Dirk. Okay.
Sure.
Now, next article, actually kind of similar because it ties in with well, it's a number for one thing. It's 5 instead of 4, but it also ties.
Yours is better than mine.
It's one better, but it also ties in with this whole idea that you're going to try to improve by better organizing what you're doing, and communication is a big part of this. In this case, we're really talking about communicating with your customers. The article is titled "The 5 Agreements of Customer Experience," and it was written by Annette Franz-Glenecki and appeared in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, and that's written for us a few times in the past. And excuse me, God, I had a terrible cold the last few days, and apologize for that. Last week too was really bad, but I'm better now. So anyway, okay, the 5 agreements of customer experience, as you can see right there from Annette Franz-Glenecki. And this piece, as Annette always talks about, is about customers, of course, and it's one of my favorite topics too, because customers are eternally important. I mean, it's really the core definition of quality itself is conformance to customer requirements. Annette is a passionate advocate of customers as well, and we've had her on the show talking about it in the past. In this column, she takes off on the problem of how you ensure great customer experiences with her reading of a very well-known book by Don Miguel Ruiz called The 4 Agreements, written a few years ago, and his follow-up book to that called The Fifth Agreement. So 5 agreements in total that Don Miguel Ruiz mentions in his writing. So these 5 agreements, as Annette looked at them, really help discuss and cover not only personal growth, which is really kind of what the purpose of the Ruiz book was about, but from her perspective, looking at it from how professionals can look at that and achieve success in her realm of expertise, which is customer care. So I want to take a moment and just kind of flash up the five agreements that are mentioned in Ruiz's two books and how Annette takes off from them. The first one, be impeccable with your word. I think that's pretty well understood. You know, mean what you say and say what you mean, right? I mean, especially when you're dealing with customers, you want to make sure that you are transparent, that you're telling them what you know and that you're giving them the information that they need. That's really important, because if you're not impeccable with your word and you start to equivocate a little bit and you start to want to maybe phrase things in a sweeter way, or maybe try to make things look better than they are, it's going to bite you. Because it's going to be found out eventually, and once you've kind of lost that trust a little bit with your customers, it's very, very hard to get it back. So that, I think, is the first and foremost one, is there, be impeccable with your word. The second one is don't take anything personally. Really good. I mean, if you're in customer service, you're dealing with stuff, or sales, I know this from experience, you're dealing with stuff all day long. Things happen that you can't control, and even if you can control them, they don't happen the way you want them to, and there's emotions involved, and you can either damp something down or you can ramp it up depending on how you respond to a customer complaint or an issue or problem, whatever it may be. So if you don't take things personally, if you detach yourself a little bit from that, which doesn't mean you don't care, by the way, but it just means you don't take it so personally that it really begins to bug you, and then you take it out on your customer or your coworker, whomever it may be, down the line. If you don't do that, if you don't take it personally, you can be much more effective in how you're dealing with your customers. Okay, agreement number 3. Don't make assumptions. Don't assume. We know that whole one. When you assume, you know what you do. Yeah, don't make assumptions. Find out for sure. Get the facts. Make sure that if you're dealing with a customer, you know what the issue is. Don't assume. And what happens in this way, and this is my own take on this many times, is maybe your organization has a specific weakness or problem, and maybe that deliverables maybe are late sometimes. Don't assume that's what's going on. Don't assume when a customer starts talking about an issue that they're having that automatically it's because, our deliverability is bad. We delivered it that late to them, and that's why they're having the problem. Find out. I mean, it may be a totally different issue. It may not be that issue. It may be that issue. But if you assume, you're never going to really know, and you're never going to really be able to serve your customer properly and get to the heart of what the issue really is. That's a big one. Fourth agreement is always do your best. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. Don't sub-optimize yourself. I think many of us do that, especially when you're working a full day and you have a lot going on, and sometimes you don't give your full attention to it, to a problem that's happening, an issue that's happening, a conversation that you're having with a customer. Always do your best. Be present. Presence is a big part of what Ruiz talks about in his books. Being present, being in the moment, engaging with somebody that you're dealing with at that time, because again, it's the kind of thing that people can tell. People can tell if you're just going through the motions. People can tell if you're on a call with them and you're on Facebook at the same time, even if they can't hear you typing. They know because you're not feeding back to them what you're hearing, and you're not really actively engaged. That's really, really important one. And the fifth one, which again comes from the latest Ruiz book, the fifth agreement, is be skeptical but learn to listen. There's a great Russian quote, "Doverai ni toverai," trust but verify. Love that one. That was Ronald Reagan quoted that from Gorbachev many years ago. But yeah, that's the heart of that. Is you want to approach things with skepticism. You want to wonder a little bit, and you want to probe, but be open. Be open to the experiences at the same time. Those 5 agreements, I think, are great practical reasons for great practical ways to approach your customers, because you're going to eventually deal with them better, and they're going to appreciate it more if you take that tact. If you're present and you're accountable and you say what you mean, all those things, you're going to do much better. Well, that, I think, those are all great pieces of advice. And to me, they reflect as well on another story that we ran, actually, in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, called From Knowledge of Wharton. This one was titled Splicing the Feedback Loop. And again, that was in Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, and it kind of deals with also customers and customer relations in a real way, and the emotions of that. Because what it's talking about is there's so much feedback that customers can give you now in so many different ways that existed in the past, but really weren't as prevalent in the past. Maybe. I mean, you look at things like Yelp, social media, where people can can tell you what they think about your customer in so many ways, and other customers can maybe find out about a company in so many different ways. But there's an issue with that because it takes you a step back from the emotional connection that you're going to have when you're dealing with a customer and a customer is dealing with you. Where you have post-event feedback, either through a survey or through comment on a social media site, it's not immediate. Now, what will happen, for instance, is if you have an issue with a barista at Starbucks, let's say, right? I mean, if you wait, if you don't say anything at the time, now again, they're busy, I know what's going on, you don't want to necessarily do that, but in the past, maybe you could have that immediate connection with them and you could tell them what was wrong and why you're unhappy or why you think they're great, whatever it may be. Maybe it doesn't have to take very long. But that was much more of a personal connection. Now it's so much more distant from that, people are encouraged to name a name of a person that gave them great service at Starbucks, and maybe they do it, maybe they don't.
Well, they want you to fill out a survey or whatever. Yeah.
I mean,
which is so removed from the.
It's just very removed from the time, and people don't do it. I mean, people do it very rarely, and it's not as good as that immediate contact that you have. These things, to me, both kind of work along the same idea. What Annette's talking about, what that Knowledge of Wharton piece is talking about, the emotional connection that you want to form between a customer and between a company, because that's how you're gonna bind those two things together. I mean, this really is, to use what's become kind of a hackney term, branding. It's really about branding, and the brandification of companies is not really that long-term of a thing. I mean, I don't know if any of you out there noticed, but a few weeks back, one of the greats of branding, Wally Owens, UK consultant and ad man in the 60s, started his career in the 50s and 60s. He recently passed away at the age of 83. He was really the first one to really understand branding and understand that branding was an emotional way to connect people with companies. That when people wanted to when an advertiser wanted to advertise, a company wanted to advertise their products, they had to do it in an emotional way. They had to connect to an experience that their user was having. All these things are all pieces of a larger picture. This idea that companies today have to understand that their customers, your customers, want to have an emotional engagement with you. And if you do that, I would say you're going to win. You're going to win because people want to feel that way. Now, it's calculated a little bit, I think, maybe, but you want to make it not calculated. Our job if we're serving customers is to make it not calculated, to make it real. And it's got to be real. You can't fake it. It's not something you're ever going to be able to fake. And I think all those stories from Annette Franz-Glenecki, the Knowledge of Wharton piece, the recent passing of Wally Owens, all those things kind of percolated around in my mind as I'm thinking about these stories. And I think that it's eternally important to understand who your customers are, how you can connect with them, and do a better job of doing that. And that's what those pieces really say.
And it's actually the function. It's being aware of this is part of the function of what a quality professional does, and is what we're supposed to be actively involved with.
Right back to the start. Quality is conformance to customer requirements, and that's the best definition of it you can ever find.
And we had a letter from a reader last week that kind of questions. What's going to happen with quality professionals in the
methodologies,
future? Yeah, and he talks about the methodology. How do methodical quality assurance tools and methodical quality professionals fit in today's fast-paced, give it to me now world, like, at Starbucks?
Yes.
That's the question that Prashant in Delhi is asking. Prashant is a quality assurance guy at one of the world's leading IT giants in India. He's familiar and has read all about Deming and Duran and Crosby and Feigenbaum and Schuhart and how they applied their tools and practices to solve day-to-day problems, and he's learned from them. But as he points out, these guys all use traditional models of management, which was all about culture and understanding and applying the basic quality tools. But, Prashant writes, maybe the time was such that it worked back then, but in today's world of Twitter and Facebook and Google, when even a delay of 1 second can be too long, how can we expect people to use control charts or check sheets or Pareto or Kano models? Leaders and managers don't have time for these methods. Companies are only interested in cost savings rather than making their processes more efficient. Today, the quality professional's role is limited to getting certifications and cutting costs by any means necessary, with culture change being much less important. So, how do we survive? I think our role will cease to exist in the next 5 to 10 years because the old management principles are outdated. What do you think Deming or Duran would do? What should be done? And that was from Prashant in Delhi, India.
Excellent point.
Excellent question. Is there patience for? I think it's a little overblown, but it's an interesting question. Is what is the role of the quality professional in today's society when everything has to happen like this?
Yeah, exactly right. And you know what he's talking about there is those tried and true perspectives from the greats in our industry from decades ago. It was a different time. It was a time where we had a little more time to consider and imbue culture. The Japanese certainly in the 50s certainly took their time to do that, the 40s and 50s and 60s. So is it a different time now? How do we respond to that?
Well, we want you to respond to it. So, hey, you know, if you have an answer for Prashant that we can forward on to him, maybe we're going to work this into an article perhaps, send your suggestions. What's a quality professional to do? Send it to qdl@qualitydigest.com, and we might use your comments in a forthcoming topic. So, you know, we're about to wrap up this week. It was a interesting bunch of topics that we had this weekend.
Yeah, it was. We had some good stuff to go on. I think nine things. Four
from me.
4 from me, 5 from you. That's right. Before we go, we want to thank our sponsor for the week, Hexagon Metrology. Hexagon Metrology is committed to helping you control your processes, enhance the quality of your products, and increase efficiencies. They empower you to stay one step ahead of a changing world with their wide range of product offerings, nearly 200 years of expertise, and an extensive support network. Hexagon Metrology, where quality comes together. For more information, click on the banner ad just below or just to the right of this video player screen.
That's right, and we left you with 9 interesting points.
That's right. So remember them all and write them back to us.
That's right. And remember, if you want to comment on Prashant's thing about, you know, it's a fast-paced world, what's a quality professional do, send your comments to qdl@qualitydigest.com. That's it for this week, and we thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Happy Mother's Day, everybody out there.
Happy Mother's Day, that's right.
We'll see you next week here
all
on
you mothers.
Quality Digest Live and next Monday for Quality Digest Daily.
So long.
Thanks, bye.
One, fire.